You probably keep digital copies of your passport or degree in a secure app on your phone. If you ever need to prove your identity, the evidence is immediately accessible. For a professional auditor, establishing legal proof works exactly the same way, but on a much larger scale. Standard on Auditing 230, or SA 230, requires auditors to maintain what we call audit documentation. This is the formal record of every procedure you perform, the specific evidence you obtain, and the final conclusions you reach. This record acts as a protective shield. If your professional judgment is ever questioned by a regulatory body months or years down the line, your working papers serve as the verifiable proof of the work you actually did. Looking at the structure of SA 230, the standard dictates two primary objectives. First, the documentation must provide a sufficient and appropriate record to back up the final auditor's report. Second, it must prove that the entire audit was planned and performed strictly according to legal and regulatory requirements. That means writing things down is the legal foundation of the entire process. Without proper documentation, an audit has no legs to stand on. It is easy to assume that filing paperwork is strictly a historical exercise, simply logging what happened after the fact. But documentation actually drives the strategy for the future. Consider the audit of Extremely Vibrant Limited. This diagram shows how last year's working papers directly build this year's strategy. By identifying red flags and specific risks on the left, the team maps out targeted procedures in the new audit plan on the right. Beyond planning, this documentation network serves immediate operational needs. It allows senior team members to direct and supervise the work, ensures every member is accountable for their specific tasks, and enables both internal and external quality control inspections. Through this process, documentation becomes the active mechanism that guarantees the engagement is planned effectively and executed responsibly. Because these files will eventually be reviewed by others, the standard for how much detail to include is strictly defined by the Experienced Auditor benchmark. This checklist represents that test. The documentation must be clear enough that an experienced professional with absolutely no prior connection to your audit can step in and understand exactly what happened. They need to see exactly who performed the work, when it was completed, who reviewed it, and the specific extent of that review. Meeting that standard means being highly selective about what goes into the final file. It is a curated collection of evidence, not a dumping ground for every piece of paper generated. The final record retains structured evidence, audit programs, confirmation letters, completed checklists, and correspondence with management regarding significant matters. Conversely, you actively discard the noise. Superseded drafts, documents with corrected typos, duplicates, and rough notes reflecting incomplete thinking do not belong in the final file. So if you scribble down a few thoughts during a meeting with the CFO, but later draft a formal issues memorandum detailing the conclusions, which one do you keep? You retain the formal memorandum as the permanent record and discard the rough handwritten notes. To capture those details accurately, you have to document as you go. Looking at this timeline, you can see documentation happening continuously from commencement straight through to the final report. This timely preparation prevents you from forgetting critical nuances weeks later. Once the auditor's report is issued, you enter a final administrative phase to formally assemble all these working papers into the final audit file. To lock down this process, you generate an audit file completion memorandum. This document signals that the assembly is finished, summarizing the significant matters and officially closing the active documentation phase. And once assembled, that file belongs entirely to the auditor. Even though it contains client financial data, the audit documentation itself is the exclusive property of the audit firm. Reviewing the core pillars of SA 230, you document to build an evidentiary record, you write for the experienced auditor, and you assemble it promptly into a secure file. In the professional world, the rule is absolute. If it is not documented, it simply is not done.